Hello, my name's Paul and I'm the Accidental Bookseller. Welcome to the channel. I've got behind on a few tags recently, so there's a couple that I'm going to film today of tags that I think I got nominated a couple of months ago. And I've been meaning to do them, and today's the day. The first one that I'm going to film, it's the new Windows and Mirrors book tag. I've been nominated by Alan at Alan's Reads. This is a tag which was invented by Pat at Book Chat with Pat. So I'll put both of their videos in the notes. Also, there's quite a lot of blur because I believe there was a similar tag some time ago, which is mentioned, as well as the reasons for what goes into this particular tag. The first question: talk about a few books that served as mirrors to you, allowing you to see some aspect of your life experience reflected in a meaningful way. It's not about meaningful way, but within these 4 questions, I've picked 4 books, and I'm sure I can guarantee that these 4 books have never been mentioned within a 15-minute spell anywhere on YouTube before. The first book is Paint My Name in Black and Gold, The Rise of the Sisters of Mercy. It's a classic Detroit club photograph there. The reason I've picked this, I've had it probably about 7 or 8 months, not read it yet. It's one of my priorities for the new year, but I had to get it because it's not on a big label, and I didn't want it to go out of print, and I was worried it might, so I got it to read at a later date. And the reason I've picked this for this tag is because it really shines a light into my musical journey in my mid-teens. So like anyone, I followed popular music, and if you can imagine yourself on a road and then there's weeds on the side of the road, before you actually get into the weeds, you've got to take a few steps towards the weeds before you get into them. And before you get into the full depths of musical culture and what's there to be loved and cherished, amongst the different genres, you've got to take little steps. And the first step where I started to deviate away from the middle was getting into the Sisters of Mercy. The point where I got into them was just before the first album, First and Last and Always, when Wayne Hussey had joined, and to make the classic Sisters lineup of Wayne Hussey, Gary Marks, Craig Adams, and Joe Eldritch. And slightly before that, there was a guitarist was Ben Gunn, and he was there during the recording of the classic single Alice, which marks probably the signature sound of what I'd call proper northern goth in the early 80s, and the sound which has been mirrored throughout the ages. But the particular that guitar sound, which I'll put Alice in the notes, is very distinctive. As I got into this, I then got into others, and predominantly towards goth, since it's become a lot more. But if you've seen my 8 memories tag of my journey and times following bands in the 80s, this kind of marks the stepping off the road towards the weeds. I'm particularly a fan of them during those early days, and their history provokes quite a widespread reaction on social media and among fans, whereas there's actually particular Facebook groups for particular eras of the band. I'm particularly into the first album period, when Hussey and Adams left to form the Mission. Eldritch carried on with Patricia Morrison being drafted in to record the album Floodland, and Floodland's a decent album. Then beyond that, the Sisters became a much more generic rock band. Okay, but nothing to write home about. But the first album era is, it's the best period of the Sisters in my opinion, and also marks my deviation into the weeds of popular music culture. The next book in terms of mirrors into my life, I guess, and that's The Death of Marco Pantani by Matt Rendell. So I've mentioned before that my passion is American football, but my second passion in sporting terms is watching professional cycling. But this book is a really, really great book, not just about cycling, but about the descent of a character leading to the end of Marco Pantani. And also, it's quite a dry book because it goes into a lot of detail about doping in sport, namely doping in professional cycling, because Marco Pantani was a doper. Now, there is a second book that I recommend. If you're going to read The Death of Marco Pantani, there's a second book called Man on the Run, The Life and Death of Marco Pantani by Manuela Ronchi and Gianfranco Giosti. This book goes more into detail about the descent of the character of Marco Pantani and the personal demons that he faced, whereas this one concentrates more on his cycling career. I'm the sort of person who I don't like to form an opinion without knowing as many facts as possible. And I think, apart from maybe moral issues, in other facets of life, the more facts you know, the less something becomes an opinion, because you're basing your thoughts upon a grounding in facts. And doping is one where I've, over the 30 to 40 years that I've been into cycling, I've deliberately set out to gain a lot of information about it. In fact, if I was going on Mastermind, I think that my specialist subject would be doping in professional sport, to the extent where once you know about sort of the types of drugs that elicit certain types of performance, you can identify other sports. While cycling has dramatically cleaned up its act, certainly from about the last 10 to 15 years compared to what it was like, but other major sports have done very little to clean up their act. They'll say that they might have a doping policy, but if they're only urine testing, that's not going to get a lot of the stuff that can be taken. You really need to have a really robust blood testing regime, and also penalties that are commensurate with doping. So let's take the NFL, for example, for American football, a relatively okay testing policy, but a completely derisory penalty system where you might get banned for a number of games, rather than the Olympic doping bans of 2 years, 4 years, etc. And then other major sports where, like I say, you know they're not testing properly, where there's a lot of fatigue involved through repeated activity of the sport. You know that particular drugs might help, and if during their testing regime they're not testing in a way that can catch those particular drugs, then typically where money is involved, there will be doping. Matt Cavendish did a good interview. The ex-British rider did a good interview on TalkSport a couple of weeks ago, talking about doping and potentially other sports. Doesn't name any because obviously it's best not to. But yeah, once you get a grounding in actual the depths of what can be done, you can see it in other sports. How it refers to me is that for the last this year was the 34th year that I'd organised a fantasy cycling competition for the Tour de France. Sometimes I do the Tour of Spain and the Tour of Italy as well, but typically it's just the Tour de France. Quite a detailed Excel-based thing. You have to be quite geeky and stat-based. But there's it can be anywhere from 12 to 18 of us that enter on any particular year. And it's part of my life, and this is the best cycling book I've ever read. So I thought it was a decent topic. I better shut up before there's many viewers left. Next question is, talk about a couple of booktubers whose reading is most like your own. Well, the first is Alan from Alan's Reads, where I don't think we don't read the same books, but I think we read around about the same genres, but since potentially different authors. I know he reads crime and he reads non-fiction history with a bit of natural history, a bit of horror. He reads King, I know, and just a classics. There's just a widespread gamut of what he reads. And I don't think there's anyone, I don't think I'd want to follow anyone that had exactly the same reading as me, because you want to learn things and you want to get recommendations. And it's nice to actually see reviews of books that you've already read as well. But I think Alan touches a lot of the reading nerves that I read as well. The second person that I'm going to mention is Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf or Bookshelves. I came across her channel right at the start of getting into Booktube, which is, as I've said before, was only in about February of this year. And I saw a few of her videos, watched one, then watched another. And I remember there was one of the videos, it was either a best of the year in a certain year, because she had recorded over a number of years, or it was the best books of all time. And there was about 2 or 3 of books that she talked about, which I agreed with, that are in my best as well. I'm not on about the 5th or 6th video that I watched. I realised that there hadn't been a video for about a year. So I looked at the comments for the last video, and sadly she'd passed away. You don't realise how attached to different people that you're watching multiple videos of and enjoying. And yeah, when it's just it's really sad. Obviously, it's trite to say it's really sad, because obviously it's really sad. But she was such a nice person, and with such a fantastic interest in books. I would recommend, if you don't know about her channel, to seek out her channel. All the videos are there, and there's lots and lots and lots. And just a nice person with lots and lots of great bookish things on there. Number 3, talk about a few books that served as window frames to you, allowing you to see the reality of others outside of your experience. So like question 1, I've got 2 books to mention in this topic. And the first is Have a Nice Day by Mankind, or Mick Foley is his real name, but used to be a wrestler in the WWF, as it was called then, but it's E now. I haven't watched any wrestling for, oh God, maybe 20 to 25 years. But when I did, Mankind was wrestling. I was in Las Vegas on holiday and I saw this in the bookshop. I had to buy it. It had become a bestseller, as it says. This is, and I'm not exaggerating, this is the best autobiography I've ever read, bar none. It's just really entertaining, shines a light on wrestling itself. I know people say, oh, it's fake and whatnot. And of course, yes, the matches are stage managed, but there's a path towards, like in any career, if you're good at something, you might be given better chances and better opponents. So for example, if you're good at actual physical wrestling, that's one attribute. If you're good on a microphone, that's another attribute. If you can make your opponent look good, that's another attribute. If you're skilled to win over the crowd in them thinking you're a goodie or a baddie, that's another attribute. And the better you are, the more chances you get, to the point where you will gradually ascend up the quality ladder, where you might be given title shots. Where it's relevant to the question is how it relates to other autobiographies. Because in the first 2 to 3 chapters, Mick explains the WWE had approached him, said, "Look, we'd like an autobiography about you. Well, don't worry, you don't have to write it. We'll arrange some meetings with ghostwriters." He said, "Oh, okay." So he flew from one side of America to the other, to have meetings with various ghostwriters, and he quickly realised ghostwriters sometimes can spend virtually no time with the person they're writing the book about. I could be wrong. I can't remember the exact time frame, but there was one that only required, was it a half an hour meeting with a celebrity in order to write an autobiography about them. Might be wrong on the half an hour, but it was a ridiculously small amount of time. And so he had these interviews, and then he flew back. And on that plane ride back, he thought, "Oh, this can't right. I'm going to have a go at this myself." And so he wrote 2 to 3 chapters, firstly about that process, about potentially being asked and getting a ghostwriter and going through that. And he writes in a funny style as well. And he realised after 2 to 3 chapters, he thought, "You know what, I can do this." So he did. So he all totally written by himself, very funny in places, very enlightening, shines a whole window on a particular industry. As I said, I haven't watched. I couldn't tell you who's good at wrestling these or in the public eye on wrestling these days, because I've not seen it in decades. But this particular book, I don't know if you read this now, you probably have to know him to appreciate it as well, because he talks about his experiences in things like Japanese barbed wire matches and stuff like that. And you might have to know about certain popular wrestlers of the day, which obviously I did when I was reading it because I knew about them. It's a really, really great book. If you see it cheap anywhere, or if you've got a son that's into wrestling or daughter, then this might be a good thing to pick up for a couple of quid. Great book. The second book I want to talk about in this particular question is Konstantin Rodiv and his book Breakthrough, which was written in, I'm going to say, late 60s, 70s. I'll put the photograph of it up here because my copy is not on these shelves. It's packed up in boxes upstairs because I haven't touched it in 30, 40 years. And it's about electronic voice phenomena and the recording of, allegedly, the dead. Whether it is the dead is up for interpretation. When I was about 11 or 12, I had a choice when I left school each day of getting the bus outside the school or walking into town and getting a bus from there. And often I would walk into town and go into the adult public library and read books on the paranormal there. Because in those days, Lancaster Library, I would call it a proper library. These days, there's nowhere near the amount of books in there than there was. It's more of a public activity space as well as a library. I think, well, that might be a good thing in terms of keeping the building open and keeping things running and interesting for the community. I think it's quite sad that a lot of books are not there for that's available anymore. But in those days, there was a really great selection on not just paranormal books, but proper in-depth paranormal books and studious paranormal books, one of which was Konstantin Rodiv's Breakthrough. I later read a book, not much later, when I was about 14 or 15. I got hold of a copy of a book by, I'm not sure who wrote it. I can't remember because I don't have it anymore. I gave it away. I think it's called Life After Life. I think it wasn't Life After Death, Life After Life. That also talked about EVP. Both books went into a degree of detail about acquiring EVP messages, to the extent that why it counts with this particular question is because when I look at or watch particular, let's call them ghost hunting videos, and they've got all this particular sort of tech equipment, and they'll turn a recorder on and they'll allegedly get sounds and things, entities making noises, and I think it's just absolute horse manure. Well, or it's likely to be, because in those earlier forms of trying to get EVP phenomena, particular things had to be done in particular different ways. Then it was on using reel-to-reel recorders that got better results than other types of recorders. Also, particular times of day were better than others because they could rule out interference from some radio channels. So if you're getting particular sounds being recorded, and there was very little on the airwaves at that time of day or night, you could rule a lot of things out. And they also found that if you started off by recording and you'd ask things into, or just let it record, you wouldn't really get much. And if you asked questions into it, again, you wouldn't really get much. But over a number of days, you would potentially get answers to the questions that you were asking into it. But it appeared to take a degree of time so that whatever was being attracted into giving these sounds, not necessarily a degree of trust, but there was some reason needed in developing a bond where the greater the bond and the greater the repetition had greater degrees of success. Whether that was the dead, who knows? No one has been able to prove one way or the other. But certainly, if you did things in a certain way, you could get certain results. So that it's just absolutely laughable, the stuff that you see on TV. They've taken what you would call proper scientific approaches to things, and they'll just record stuff and say it's this, that, and the other. And I know the programs start off, they have to start off now with the tagline of "it's for entertainment purposes only." There's so many believers in that type of crap, not just not conspiracies as such, but just the paranormal and different topics and genres within the paranormal. People are very believing of stuff that if they just stopped and thought about it, they'd know it was absolute rot and rubbish that they believe in. And yeah, sorry, I'm getting a bit too opinionated, but I come from the background with my job of software testing, of wanting detail and completely sitting on the fence until I see one way or the other where the probability lies with it being potentially this reason or that reason, or whether it does exist or certain things exist or not. And it would be arrogant to say using common sense, because I'm sure the people think they might be doing the same. But I'm very untrusting of things until I see actual proof. And the stuff that you see happening today being published as proof, that just simply isn't. Sorry. Highly opinions. I tried to make this an opinion-free channel, but I think you call it passion. So the reason I picked Breakthrough by Rodiv is because it highlights where my interest started in the paranormal, and it's obviously grown over the last, well, not grown, I've just become more widely read over the last 40 years. Number 4, final question. Talk about a couple of Booktube channels that have expanded your horizons, helped you to explore books or genres outside of your comfort zone, or challenged you in some way. I wouldn't say out of my comfort zone, but there's 2 particular channels that I'm going to talk about which have influenced me, I think I could go so far as to say, and to a certain extent challenged me. The first is the channel by Paulina Maria, who talks predominantly about classics. And it's really got me into wanting to read more classics again. I deviated away from classics for quite a long period of my life because, I mean, there's only so many books that you can read within certain amounts of time. But I have moved during my reading life. I've moved from genre to genre to genre. I try to go fiction, non-fiction, fiction, non-fiction, and I find that gets the story out of your head from a fiction book. It clears it, ready for the next time if you read a non-fiction book next. I've never been one for reading multiple books at the same time. But yeah, Paulina's very good at reviewing books without giving stuff away as well. And the wide gamut of stuff that's mentioned on the channel, it's really admirable, the amount of hard reads, I would call them hard reads, that she gets through. And also, English isn't a primary language. Yeah, I highly recommend reading her channel because it has certainly influenced me into wanting to read more. And I'm already planning for 2026 that I'm going to concentrate on several genres. I'll touch on other things as well to still keep me interest widespread. But I'm definitely going to read more classics in 2026. And watching Paulina Maria's channel is one reason for having that. The second person that I'm going to mention is Simon from Science Fiction Retirement Library. When I was first starting to watch Booktube videos in February of this year, up to now, I just used, up to February, I was just watching YouTube for things like, if you needed to do something around the house and you wanted a help video, then you might watch YouTube for that, or music videos. But I simply wasn't aware of Booktube. And then when I was aware, I watched a couple. If you just search Booktube and holes, you'll get, I want to be polite, you'll get influencer types with like lorry loads of holes where you think, how can they possibly have afforded it? Not necessarily books that I would want to read anyway. But then you delve a bit more and your search ability gets a bit better and you know where to look a bit more. And after a couple of weeks, I arrived at the start of Simon's Science Fiction Retirement Library. And obviously, from the name, it's science fiction. And he's accumulating books to read in retirement, lots of holes, but lots of other good stuff as well. That has rekindled my interest in science fiction. And there's a couple of other channels that do similar things, but Simon's the one that started it off for me again. I hadn't read science fiction for quite a number of years before arriving at Booktube and seeing his videos and other people's. And I realised what a widespread field science fiction really is. There's so much to be read and it's of interest. And I think maybe my reading career had drifted. So I'm reading more science fiction. I plan to read more in 2026. So it's classics and science fiction. I'm going to try and read more of those, also filling in some of the others. And I've also found that the science fiction Booktube community this might be a little bit controversial, but I think it's nicer than some of the other communities. So, for example, in my earlier years, I read a lot of horror, not so much recently, but there are horror channels and horror hole videos. Some of the maybe I've just found the wrong ones, but there are people who just aren't very, not amenable to suggestions of what books to read. If you like comment on a particular video, and there's younger people who will read who are really trapped in a cycle of reading newer books that they regard as horror, and you'll try and recommend other more classic horror authors, and it'll either get ignored and just carry on with their particular, hey, if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do, but it's not very engaging. Whereas from the science fiction side, there's a number of channels and a number of people that are just very engaging, not necessarily willing to help, because I'm not actually asking for help, advice, but just being chatty about books or their videos. And they're just so much more, that the science fiction community in Booktube is so much more engaging than the horror community, to the extent where, yeah, I want to read more science fiction because I'm being influenced by videos, and I've not got no real desire to read any more horror than I read already, which I've said is not very much in recent years. So that's number 4, and that's it. But I don't know how long I seem to have taken a lot longer than I thought I would for this particular tag. I think it says tag others, but this has been around for a while, and there's a lot of people been tagged. So I'll just leave it there and just do the video. And yeah, if you've enjoyed it, if you've enjoyed me rambling on and you want to watch more videos, by all means click like, click subscribe, Very much appreciate it if you would. And I'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.